at the end of the day, nothing was done. The international community is still trying to gather countries together to take action against Syria.
Well, it can never be late to do the right thing. The war in Syria has taken a lot of toll in terms of civilian casualties, and it's increasing in terms of dimension. Obviously, what is happening there, although the Syrian government keeps on calling them terrorist groups, but it's very obvious, even the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is charged with responsibility for promoting international humanitarian law, has declared that what is happening there is a civil war. And once that declaration is met by a responsible agent like the International Committee of the Red Cross, then the law of warfare triggers and sets in. And so even in war, the law must still speak. And what the international community is trying to do is to bring Syria to abide by certain international norms, both conventional and customary, which I may speak on later on as we proceed. So it is obviously not late to at least stop the carnage that is going on there and then prevent the humanitarian crisis that is ongoing in Syria.
Yeah, but what is the essence of allowing the monitors to go in to determine that you have chemical weapons being used in a place and then not to be able to determine who used it? It sounds like a fruitless mission.
Well, I think they have to cross one barrier first before they can now determine as to which of the parties to the conflict have made use of it. It doesn't really matter which of the parties, whether it's the opposition parties or the government. The fact is that the use of chemical weapons is prohibited under international humanitarian law. And so at some point it will be obvious, the starting point is to find out whether it has been used. And then after that we'll now speak of which party to the conflict has made use of it, because it's a law, it's a war crime, the use of that weapons, whether or not Syria is a party to the Chemical Weapons Convention or not.
How easily could both sides have access to this weapons, these chemical weapons? And that question is actually for both of you. How easily could both parties have access to it, both the rebels and the government?
Well, for state, that's quite easy because, I mean, they have the facilities to produce it, to stockpile it, and possibly to use it. But for non-state actors, that depends on the sources of supply. And there are a number of rogue states that can easily pass these weapons into their hands. For example, North Korea is not a party to the Chemical Weapons Convention. Angola is not a party. Egypt is not a party. South Sudan is not a party. A few other countries are not parties. So it's possible for non-state parties to obtain these weapons from those other countries that are not parties. Even for countries that are parties, although of course that would be a violation of international law. But for states like Syria, for government of Syria, it shouldn't be a problem because it's known to produce these weapons, to stockpile them, and so it probably can use them when the need arises.
Does the U.S. have stockpiles of chemical weapons?
Well, yes, they do, but as signatory, as parties to the convention, which is the Chemical Weapons Convention, which entered into force in 1997, there are obligations. And part of the obligations is that they should destroy their stockpiles, eliminate them, or convert them into peaceful use. Because it's not as if some of these facilities cannot be used for peaceful purposes. Just like nuclear weapons. You know, part of the argument of Iran is that they are developing the nuclear energy for purpose of nuclear energy, although the international community is suspecting that Iran may actually use it to acquire nuclear weapons. So some of these weapons can also be converted into peaceful uses. So even for advanced countries that have these weapons in their supply, part of the obligation under the convention is that either you destroy them or you convert them into peaceful purposes.
Just like my colleague, Professor Dombana, has been saying, these chemicals are not difficult to manufacture. Indeed, the origins of the toxic gases is essentially being used as insecticides. Sarin, in its first manufacture, was supposed to be as an insecticide. When the German firm produced it in 1938 for the first time, essentially as an insecticide, as well as a rodenticide, that is to destroy rats and stuff. However, over time, it's been refined and turned into a weapon because of its powerful asphyxiant properties that it has. And therefore, it's not difficult to find that a country like Syria, high level in chemical production, could produce these chemical weapons, these chemical agents, and stockpile, and make it believe that it is for purposes for peaceful use, for domestic use.
But I don't understand how chemical weapons could be for peaceful use.
The way I can put it is this: virtually every chemical is a weapon. Even the common salt in which we add to our food can become a weapon. It depends on the way it is modified and used. As I said, sarin and VX and GB, it comes in various names, were originally manufactured as malations. Malations are indeed the product in your household insecticides. I don't want to mention names for commercial purposes. So your household insecticides contain the same thing, but they come in formulations that cannot harm the man, but can harm the insect as well as the pest that is disturbing man. But in another formulation, it becomes a weapon. So indeed, in fact, it's always been suggested by security agents that if a woman feels threatened and she's carrying a perfume in her bag, she can use it to protect herself, because it then suddenly becomes a weapon. Don't forget that the perfume was supposed to just be put on the body to give a nice smell, but in an attack, it can then be turned. It's the same thing with chemical agents. Chemical agents ordinarily can be for peaceful use, and that's the intention of the Chemical Weapons Convention. The intent of that convention, multilateral treaty, is to ensure that those who happen to have stockpiled chemical weapons, please turn it into peaceful use, which is to say, get it into a formulation that it can now become an everyday chemical for everyday use. But what we find, several countries stockpile and then use it in times of war.
Maybe if I can just add to that, it is not the weapons itself that is to be converted. Those who have already upgraded to weapon stage are to destroy under the convention. But the facilities for the production can be converted into civilian and peaceful purposes. Right. It's just like the nuclear facilities, which is what Iran is building currently. You could also get to a stage where you can convert them into a weapon grade. But Iran is arguing currently that what they are building, what they are constructing, all the facilities is for purpose of generating electricity and other, peaceful purposes. Of course, the international community does not believe. So for those countries that have already started producing them, under the obligation under the convention is that they should destroy them and then convert the facilities for that production into some other peaceful purposes.
Now, speaking of which, Syria is not the only country that's actually used chemical weapons. No, is it? No, it's not. No. I think Iran also is guilty.
Iraq has used it before over the Kurdish population, during the time of Saddam Hussein. A number of other countries have also been alleged to use it before. Like we said, even Angola is not a party to it. Egypt is not a party to it. And we are hoping that the current crisis in Egypt will not crystallize into a civil war that may raise fears of its being used also in Egypt. But a number of rogue countries have the capacity. Even North Korea, is also not just having nuclear chemical weapons, but it also has nuclear weapons. And part of the fear with North Korea is that it may actually transfer these weapons to terrorist agents who may also make use of them. Mm-hmm. So a few states have made use of them, but however they are used is prohibited under international law.
But what other chemical weapons are there? Because right now it's only sarin we know of.
Oh, there are several. In fact, they categorize into three groups. There is the Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3. The convention recognizes the three categories. They are all organic phosphates in different forms, which can serve as weapons. Sarin seems to be the easiest to manufacture and stock, and that's why it seems to be coming on, because we do have evidence that as recently as 1995, in a Tokyo tunnel, some cult group went out and, in a, I think it's an underground tube or something like that, and opened it out. Obviously that was a terrorist attack in Japan, and about 12 people died instantly, and 5,000 ended up in hospital. We have those statistics. So the sarin seems to be more common, but there are several other groups of chemical agents, which is why the United Nations decided to indeed set up an entire organization for the prohibition of chemical weapons. That's the OPCW, which is working hard and continues. Nigeria is part of that organization, and all their work is towards prevention of use of chemical weapons and even manufacture of chemical weapons, because just as Professor Dombana rightly said, some states already have facilities to produce chemical weapons. And all that the convention is saying is that if you've produced it, destroy it, because they are all easily destroyed. Even sarin can easily be destroyed without much effort. But that use your facilities to produce things for peaceful use rather than for producing weapons.
Professor, I think I'm going through my last question to you. Isn't it risky? I mean, the UN monitors, aren't their lives at risk going into these communities now to check up on those weapons?
Certainly, which is why the UN inspectors for weapons of mass destruction generally going with heavy insurance, because it is clear that the chemical agent may still be in the air. They go obviously with protective equipment, they get dressed up with masks and all that. But that doesn't quite sufficiently shield them away, as we've seen from during the Iran-Iraq war, where chemical weapons came on board. Some inspectors unfortunately lost their lives, but I mean, that's what they signed for in accepting to be part of the inspectors to go into the country. But in the case of the Damascus scenario now, we're hoping that a lot of the gas would have volatilized, a lot of it would have been off the air, and therefore their lives may not be as much at risk as if they went in, when it recently happened.
Well, thank you, Professor Ndombana and Professor Alo, for speaking with us on Diplomatic Channel. And that's Diplomatic Channel this week. Thanks for watching. Send us your thoughts via any of the addresses showing on your screen. I am Amarachi Ubani. Have a great week.